The city had edges where the map stopped making sense. Lucy pushed through a gap in the chain-link fence, her boots crunching over broken glass and discarded metal. The alleyway narrowed, choked by overgrown vines that clung to the brickwork like frozen lightning. She moved deeper, ignoring the way the air grew colder, smelling of stagnant rain and oxidized iron. A heavy, rusted gate blocked the path ahead. She gripped the cold metal, braced her feet against the uneven ground, and heaved. With a screech of protesting hinges, the gate gave way. She stepped through into a wide, silent courtyard. In the center stood the warehouse. Its windows were dark, shattered eyes, staring out at the encroaching weeds. The structure seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Lucy walked toward the main entrance, her pulse quickening with every step. She reached out, her palm flat against the heavy steel door, and felt a faint, rhythmic vibration. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light piercing the ceiling. Lucy stepped into the center of the workshop, her boots clicking against concrete littered with discarded gears and springs. She wiped a thick layer of grime from a heavy workbench, revealing a set of precision tools neatly arranged in foam cutouts. These were not ordinary instruments. She picked up a caliper, feeling the weight and balance, and knew exactly what this place was. She began to work. She scavenged through bins of high-density plastic and metal cores, selecting pieces that felt right in her palm. Her hands moved with a rhythm born of pure instinct. She filed down a jagged edge, tightened a tension spring, and aligned the weight distribution until the frame sat perfectly balanced. She christened it Graffiti Dragon. The final piece clicked into place with a sharp, satisfying snap. She held the finished object up to the light, watching the way the metal caught the dim glow. It was ready. She turned, walked to the launch area, and set the launcher down. The silence of the warehouse was gone, replaced by the hum of her own ambition. She was no longer just an explorer. She was a creator, and the game was about to change. The local park was a cacophony of shouting voices and the high-pitched whine of spinning plastic. Lucy pushed through the crowd, her hand tight around the launcher. She found an open stadium, the plastic surface scarred by countless battles. She stepped up, pulled the ripcord, and Graffiti Dragon roared into the center. It was a blur of motion, carving aggressive arcs across the floor. Her opponent's Beyblade met her head-on, the impact echoing like a gunshot. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal. Lucy leaned into the movement, her eyes locked on the spinning vortex. Graffiti Dragon surged, unleashing a flurry of strikes that pushed the opponent toward the stadium wall. The speed was blinding. The stadium floor shuddered under the force of their collision. Both Beyblades locked together, grinding in a desperate struggle for dominance. Then, the tension snapped. With a sound like breaking glass, both Beyblades burst into pieces simultaneously. The shards skittered across the stadium floor. The shouting crowd went silent. Lucy stared at the wreckage, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a tie. The crowd began to thin, their murmurs fading into the background noise of the city. Lucy knelt on the stadium floor, gathering the plastic fragments of Graffiti Dragon. Her fingers traced the stress fractures on the central core. She was still processing the impact when a shadow fell across her hands. She looked up. A person stood there, holding a tablet that displayed a frame-by-frame breakdown of her last launch. The stranger tapped the screen, highlighting the exact moment of the burst. "That level of kinetic output is rare," the stranger said, voice steady and devoid of pleasantries. The tablet screen shifted, showing a digital rendering of a sprawling campus facility. It was an invitation to the elite Beyblade Academy. Lucy stood, the weight of the fragments still in her palm. She looked at the screen, then back at the stranger. There was no hesitation in her nod. The transition was immediate. By the next morning, the park was a memory. She stood before the heavy iron gates of the academy, the air here smelling of ozone and polished metal. She pushed the gates open, the hinges groaning in protest. She walked into the courtyard, the path ahead clear and demanding. Her journey had shifted from a local curiosity to a formal pursuit. She checked her launcher one last time, felt the tension in the spring, and stepped forward into the unknown. The training grounds were a vast, climate-controlled expanse of polished concrete and high-tension netting. Lucy walked toward the center, the sound of her own footsteps echoing against the distant walls. She pulled her launcher, aiming for a practice stadium, but hesitated. The surface was different here, treated with a specialized friction-resistant coating that made her previous techniques feel crude. She watched the other students. They did not shout. They did not scramble. They moved with a rhythmic, calculated grace that made the air feel heavy with intent. In the corner of the room, a figure stood alone by a solitary stadium. This was Pone. He was not launching. He was adjusting the tension on his Beyblade, his fingers moving with surgical precision. Lucy stepped closer, her own launcher feeling heavy and unrefined in her grip. Pone did not look up, yet he seemed to track her approach by the slight change in air pressure. He set his Beyblade down, the metal clicking against the floor with a sound that lacked any wasted energy. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable, his gaze steady. The silence between them stretched, thick and expectant. As Pone gestured toward the stadium, Lucy pulled the ripcord. Graffiti Dragon hit the stadium floor with a high-pitched metallic scream, carving an aggressive arc toward the center. Pone launched his Beyblade, red velvet bat, with a flick of his wrist. It didn't rush. It drifted, sliding into a wide defensive perimeter. When the two collided, the sound was not a clash of force, but a dull, rhythmic thud. Lucy watched, her knuckles white on the launcher. She pushed for more speed, tilting the stadium angle to force a burst. Graffiti Dragon accelerated, spinning in a tight, violent spiral. Red velvet bat met every strike, its surface vibrating as it absorbed the kinetic energy. Lucy saw the shift in momentum. Her Beyblade was losing its edge, the spin slowing, the aggressive rhythm faltering. Pone remained still, his eyes locked on the spinning metal. Graffiti Dragon wobbled, the outer ring scraping against the stadium floor. It lost its balance, tilted, and slowed to a crawl. The silence in the room felt absolute as the metal finally stopped, falling flat against the surface. Lucy stared at the motionless piece of plastic. The sting of the loss lingered, but the academy schedule did not pause for reflection. Before Lucy could recalibrate her launcher, a notification chimed across the training floor. She was summoned to the central briefing wing. She walked through the corridors, the sound of her boots clicking against the polished floor, wondering if this was a dismissal or a reprimand. She entered the room and stopped. Pone was already there, standing near a tactical display. Beside him stood a girl Lucy had not seen before. This was V. The air in the room felt different, charged with a quiet, sharp intensity. A voice from the intercom confirmed the assignment. They were now a team. 3 bladers, 3 distinct styles, 1 unit. Lucy looked at Pone, then at V. V did not offer a greeting, her focus fixed on the holographic projections. There was no warmth, only a cold, professional alignment of interests. Lucy felt the shift in her own posture. The isolation of the training ground was gone, replaced by the weight of collective expectation. They were an untested trio, a combination of variables that had yet to be calculated. Pone nodded at her, a silent recognition. V remained motionless, her gaze unyielding. The room felt small, the walls closing in. Lucy tightened her grip on her launcher. The true test had only just begun. The training arena hummed with the sound of high-speed air currents. Lucy stood across from V, her launcher primed. Pone watched from the sidelines, his arms crossed. V did not wait for a signal. She pulled her ripcord, and Heartbreaker entered the stadium with a low, predatory hiss. It moved in a perfect circle, maintaining a balance that seemed impossible to disrupt. Lucy launched Graffiti Dragon, aiming for a direct impact. The 2 Beyblades collided, sparks showering the floor. Lucy pushed her launcher, forcing her Beyblade into a series of aggressive strikes. Heartbreaker absorbed the pressure, its rotation steady and unwavering. Then, the rhythm shifted. A sharp, mechanical click echoed through the arena. Heartbreaker shuddered, and suddenly, thin, metallic blades flared outward like wings. The transformation was instantaneous. The Beyblade increased its speed, the sound rising from a hiss to a piercing whine. It surged forward, catching Graffiti Dragon on its outer rim. Lucy stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the spinning, winged metal. The power gap was undeniable. The defeat did not break her. It acted as a whetstone. Lucy returned to the training grounds before the lights had fully cycled to their morning intensity. She set her launcher, pulled, and watched Graffiti Dragon spin. It was not enough. She adjusted the tension, recalibrated the weight, and launched again. Her hands ached, the skin raw from the friction of the ripcord, but she did not stop. Every failed rotation was a data point, every wobble a flaw to be corrected. Pone arrived an hour later, his own launcher already in hand. He did not speak, simply taking his position on the opposite side of the stadium. V followed, her movements precise and silent. The atmosphere in the training hall thickened. It was no longer just practice. It was a systematic dismantling of their own weaknesses. They ran drills until the air grew hot and stagnant. The sound of clashing metal became a constant, rhythmic pulse that filled the room. Lucy watched Pone analyze the trajectory of every strike, while V pushed her own limits, forcing her Beyblade to adapt to increasingly erratic launch patterns. The tournament calendar on the wall seemed to loom larger with every passing hour. They were readying themselves for a conflict that demanded nothing less than perfection. The heavy steel door of the training hall groaned open, cutting through the rhythmic clatter of the ongoing drills. A new figure stepped into the center of the room, holding a launcher that looked different from any the team had seen before. This was Sin. She stepped forward and pulled her ripcord. Metal's spino hit the floor with a sound like grinding stone. It did not spin in a standard circle. It carved a jagged, unpredictable path that defied the stadium's natural slope. The team stopped their own practice, drawn to the sheer kinetic energy radiating from the new Beyblade. Metal spino accelerated, its rotation creating a low-frequency hum. Sin watched the team, her eyes tracking their reactions. She signaled for them to launch. One by one, they complied. But their Beyblades were immediately pushed to the periphery by the sheer force of Metal Spino's presence. It was a masterclass in dominance. Sin began to bark instructions, correcting their launch angles and grip pressure with surgical precision. The intensity in the room spiked. The heavy training hall doors swung open for the last time, revealing the blinding lights of the main stadium. The air here was different, thick with the scent of ozone and the collective heat of thousands of spectators. A low, constant rumble vibrated through the floor, the sound of a crowd waiting for impact. Lucy stepped out, her boots clicking against the polished metal of the walkway. The sheer scale of the arena hit her like a physical weight. Every seat was occupied, a sea of motion that blurred at the edges of her vision. She took a sharp breath, forcing the noise into the background until only the rhythm of her own pulse remained. She walked toward the center platform, her hand resting firmly on the launcher at her side. The stadium announcer's voice boomed overhead, but the words were distant, muffled by the focus narrowing in her mind. She reached the designated station and looked across the gap. Her opponent was already there, eyes locked on the stadium floor. Lucy stepped up, planted her feet, and felt the familiar, cold weight of Graffiti Dragon in her palm. The signal light flickered, turning from amber to a steady, piercing red. She leaned forward, ready to strike. The light snapped to green. Lucy did not pull straight back. She whipped her arm in a tight, downward arc, forcing Graffiti Dragon to hit the stadium floor at a sharp, aggressive angle. It didn't drift. It bit into the surface, carving a straight line directly toward the center. Her opponent launched a defensive type, aiming to absorb the impact, but Graffiti Dragon was already moving too fast. It struck the outer rim of the opponent's Beyblade with a high-pitched metallic shriek. Sparks showered the stadium floor. Lucy didn't wait for the recoil. She tracked the movement, her eyes locked on the contact point, and shouted a command to shift the rotation. Graffiti Dragon responded, its movement pattern snapping into a jagged, inward spiral. The impact was absolute. A secondary strike followed, a brutal, precise hit that sent the opponent's Beyblade flying upward, slammed against the arena wall, and burst into pieces. Lucy stood still, her hands still gripped tight on her empty launcher. The victory was clear. The stadium was still vibrating from the first match when Pone stepped forward. He did not rush. He checked his launcher, adjusted his stance, and waited for the signal with a stillness that felt like a challenge. His opponent, rattled by the previous defeat, launched with too much force, sending their Beyblade careening wildly toward the perimeter. Pone waited. He launched Red Velvet Bat with a smooth, rhythmic pull, placing it perfectly in the center of the stadium. It didn't attack. It held its ground, a spinning anchor of absolute stability. The opponent's Beyblade hammered against it, but the energy was redirected. Pone watched, his hands steady, his eyes tracking the diminishing speed of the enemy. With a single, sharp movement, he tilted his launcher, and Red Velvet Bat surged, clipping the opponent's rim and sending it spiraling into the pocket. The win was surgical. Before the crowd could fully process the result, Sin moved into position. Metal Spino hit the arena floor with a sound like a gunshot. It roared, tearing across the surface in a blur of motion that left no room for defense. The final match of the round fell to V. She stepped to the platform, her movements fluid and devoid of hesitation. Her opponent, desperate to salvage a single point for their team, launched with a frantic, high-speed spin that forced Heartbreaker toward the stadium wall. The crowd leaned in, the sound of metal grinding against metal filling the arena. V did not flinch. She watched the collision, her hand hovering over the launcher. Heartbreaker wobbled, its balance faltering under the relentless pressure of the opponent's attack. Then, V pulled the ripcord with a sharp, rhythmic snap. The change was instantaneous. Heartbreaker surged, its chassis shifting with a series of mechanical clicks. Thin, blade-like wings extended from its core, catching the air and turning the Beyblade into a blur of aggressive motion. It pivoted on a dime, reversing its trajectory with impossible speed. V shouted a single sharp command. Heartbreaker dove, its wings vibrating with a high-frequency hum as it slammed into the center of the opponent's Beyblade. The impact was deafening. When the dust settled, the opponent's Beyblade lay motionless. V stood motionless as the referee signaled their total victory. The arena lights flickered, casting long shadows across the stadium floor as the final whistle echoed. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the cooling ventilation system. Lucy stood on the platform, her hands still gripping her launcher, watching the dust settle where the last match had raged. She looked toward the center of the stage. Pone was already there, his expression shifting from intense focus to a slow, genuine nod. V walked over, her movements no longer sharp with the tension of battle, but fluid and relaxed. They did not speak immediately. The weight of the tournament, the weeks of training, and the pressure of their debut seemed to hang in the air between them. No longer a burden, but a bridge. Sin joined them, placing a hand on the railing, looking out at the rows of empty seats that had been filled with noise only seconds before. They were a team. The realization was physical, a grounding presence that settled into their posture. Lucy felt the tension in her shoulders finally release. They had moved from individual competitors to a single, synchronized unit. The heavy glass door of the ramen shop swung open, admitting a rush of humid, savory air that instantly replaced the stale atmosphere of the arena. Lucy stepped inside first, the sudden warmth against her face acting like a physical release. The shop was packed, a chaotic symphony of clattering ceramic bowls. They found a corner booth, sliding onto the wooden benches with a collective sigh. When the steaming bowls arrived, the silence that followed was of pure hunger. Pone picked up his chopsticks, his movements deliberate as he stirred the broth. The the steam rising to fog his vision. V leaned back, her shoulders finally dropping from their defensive hunch. Sin laughed at something Lucy said, a genuine, sharp sound. The tension that had defined their movements for weeks evaporated, replaced by the simple, rhythmic motion of eating. They traded stories of small, human mistakes. Bowls were emptied, replaced by refills, and the conversation flowed with an ease that felt earned. The competitive edge was gone. For the first time, they were just 4 people sharing a meal, the weight of the tournament forgotten in the steam. The team house was quiet, a sharp contrast to the bustling street outside. Lucy pushed the door open, and they spilled into the living room, shedding their bags and gear in a heap by the entrance. The floor was bare, but the air felt heavy with the promise of rest. Pone began dragging cushions from the sofa, stacking them against the wall, while V gathered every blanket she could find from the hallway closet. The process was instinctive, a collaborative effort that required no instruction. They draped the fabric over a row of chairs, pinning the edges with heavy books to form a low, enclosed ceiling. Once the structure was complete, they crawled inside, disappearing into the dim, fabric-walled space. The interior was a tangle of pillows and soft surfaces. They sat close, shoulders brushing. Sin clicked a button on the remote, and the screen flickered to life, casting a soft, rhythmic glow across their faces. The movie began, but the sound was muffled by the blankets, creating a private sanctuary. Lucy leaned back against a pile of pillows, watching the others. The movie's dialogue blurred into a rhythmic pulse, a steady hum that pulled at Lucy's eyelids. She shifted, her cheek pressing against the soft fabric of a pillow, and the world outside the fort began to lose its sharp edges. The flicker of the screen became a distant, pulsing light, then nothing. She was no longer in the living room. The darkness of sleep was not empty. It was a vast, open space where the air felt charged with static. In the center of this quiet void, Graffiti Dragon hovered, its form shimmering with a faint, metallic luminescence. There was no sound, yet the air vibrated with a frequency that resonated in her chest. Lucy reached out, not with her hands, but with her intent. The Beyblade responded, spinning in place, its movement a silent language of kinetic energy and potential. She felt the weight of its design, the precision of its balance, and the aggressive spirit she had forged into its core. The vivid pulse of the dream faded, leaving behind only the steady, rhythmic breathing of the room. Lucy stirred, her eyes remaining closed, as the weight of deep sleep anchored her to the floor. Around her, the makeshift fort held firm, a sanctuary of cushions and fabric that shielded them from the world outside. V was curled into a tight ball against the sofa, her breathing slow and even. Pone lay stretched out near the center, one arm draped over a pillow, his face relaxed in a rare moment of total stillness. Sin had slumped against the wall, her head tilted back. Deep in the quiet of the night, the screen of the television had gone dark, leaving the room bathed in the soft, blue-tinged shadows of the moon, filtering through the window. They were scattered across the floor like pieces of a puzzle, exhausted by the intensity of their training. The long day had ended,